My name is Margaret Davis. I am 67 years old, and I thought I had seen just about everything life could throw at me. But nothing prepared me for the moment my only daughter stood at her own wedding, raised her glass, and told me to leave. I can still feel the air in that room tighten around me. 200 guests turned their heads, the clinking of forks and glasses fading into silence. My chest burned with humiliation, as if someone had ripped the floor out from under me. I smoothed the folds of my dress, the one I had pressed so carefully that morning, and tried to hold myself together. I remember thinking, how did we come to this? How did a lifetime of sacrifice end with me being cast aside like a stranger? As I placed my napkin on the table and tried to stand, my body shook. The shame was unbearable. Every eye followed me, some filled with pity, some with judgment, and others with nothing more than curiosity. It felt like the spotlight was burning a hole right through me. And then something happened that no one in that room expected. The groom, my daughter's new husband, rose from his seat. The scrape of his chair across the floor was louder than the polite applause that had just died out. His face carried a determination that made the entire hall pause. In that instant, I froze. 100 questions raced through my mind. Was he about to defend her? Was he about to shame me even further? Or was he about to reveal something no one had seen coming? I didn't know it then. But his decision to speak would change the course of my life forever. It would shatter the illusion I had clung to for years, force me to face truths I had buried, and set me on a path I never expected to walk. But before I tell you what he said, I need to take you back. Because the truth is, that night did not begin in that crowded ballroom. It began hours earlier, in the quiet of my bedroom, where I stood before the mirror and believed naively that this would be the day my daughter welcomed me back into her heart. Just a few hours before the wedding, I stood in my small bedroom, adjusting the hem of my wine-colored dress. I wanted to look elegant, dignified, even regal. At 67, I knew appearances didn't matter to most people anymore. But for me, this day carried weight. I needed to present myself as more than the invisible mother who had been pushed to the background for years. I fastened the pearl earrings that once belonged to my own mother, a quiet reminder that I came from strength. The faint scent of rose perfume clung to my wrists, mixing with the bitter aroma of the untouched coffee that sat on my nightstand. I told myself that today would be different. Today, my daughter Emily would see me. For once, she might acknowledge what I had carried all these years. I practiced my smile in the mirror, trying to steady the tears that threatened to fall. What most people never knew was how hard it had been to raise her after her father died. She was only 12 when I found myself a widow, forced into a role I never expected to carry alone. Overnight, I became mother, father, provider, and protector. I remember the first months when bills stacked so high, I thought they might bury me alive. I took every shift I could. By day, I waited tables at a diner downtown, balancing trays of pancakes and endless cups of coffee for strangers. By night, I scrubbed floors in office buildings, my knees aching, the smell of bleach and chemicals clinging to my clothes until I could hardly breathe. Every dollar I earned was stretched thinner than paper. Tuition bills years later felt like another mountain I wasn't sure I could climb. I sold the silverware from my wedding, the few pieces of jewelry my husband had gifted me, even the small house where Emily had taken her first steps. When that still wasn't enough, I let go of my wedding ring, the last symbol of the man I had loved. I remember sliding it across the counter to a jeweler, knowing it would cover just one more semester of college for her. Each sacrifice carried the same thought. If I can just give her more than I had, maybe her life will be brighter than mine. Love, for me, was never just words. It was action. It was survival. That afternoon, I walked into the church in Maplewood. The sunlight spilled through the stained glass windows. The white lilies lined the pews, and soft pink ribbons trailed down the aisle. It looked exactly like the kind of wedding Emily used to dream about as a little girl. I held on to that hope, believing that if she saw me sitting there, if she knew I was present, maybe a bridge could finally be built between us. I had saved for months to buy her a gift, a fine china set wrapped in silver paper. It wasn't much compared to what others might give, but to me, it represented every ounce of effort I had left. I clutched it like a lifeline, my heart pounding with nervous anticipation. But when I moved toward the front pews, a man in a sharp suit blocked my path. His clipboard and rehearsed smile made it clear I didn't belong where I thought I did. He told me the front rows were reserved for immediate family. My voice trembled as I tried to explain I was the bride's mother. He frowned, checked his list, and pointed me toward row 5. Row 5. I can still feel the sting of those 2 words. I sat down quietly, my chest heavy, watching strangers fill the seats where I had once imagined myself proudly watching my daughter walk down the aisle. And yet, I told myself to be patient. I whispered in my mind that maybe the reception would be different. Maybe she would see me there, waiting, and remember the years of sacrifice. Maybe, when she raised her glass to give her toast, she would look my way and let the world know that her mother mattered. But life rarely gives us the recognition we crave when we expect it most. What happened next at the reception made the ache of row 5 feel like nothing in comparison. The reception hall sparkled that evening, draped in soft lights and filled with the hum of conversation. Round tables covered in white linens stretched across the room, each one decorated with pale roses. To anyone else, it must have looked magical. To me, it felt like a test, an opportunity to see where I truly stood in my daughter's life. I found my seat at table number 8, tucked near the swinging kitchen doors. Every time a server passed through, the doors banged open, and the scent of reheated food rushed out, clinging to my dress. From that corner, I could barely see the head table where Emily sat glowing in her gown, her new husband beside her, the chandeliers reflecting off their champagne glasses. I placed the carefully wrapped china set by my chair, trying to settle my nerves. Around me sat strangers, polite but distant, the kind of guests who seemed to be there out of obligation rather than closeness. When introductions were exchanged, one woman leaned toward me and asked how I knew the bride. My heart clenched as I quietly said I was her mother. I could see the flicker of surprise in her eyes. She glanced toward the head table, then back at me with confusion. And in that moment, I felt the truth sting. The role of mother of the bride had been reduced to a seat by the kitchen, where no one could really see me. Still, I held on to hope. I thought, when the toasts begin, maybe she will acknowledge me. Maybe she will say my name. Maybe she will remember the years I carried her on my back, the nights I worked while she slept. I imagined her raising her glass, smiling at me, and letting the world know I mattered. When the toasts finally began, my heart leapt. Her husband spoke first, He thanked his parents, his mentors, and his closest friends. His voice carried warmth and gratitude. People laughed, applauded, even wiped away a few tears. I smiled politely, but inside, I was bracing myself for my daughter's turn, believing this would be the moment that stitched us back together. Emily stood then, radiant under the glow of the chandeliers. She lifted her glass, and I held my breath. But the words she spoke cut deeper than any silence ever could. She spoke about the people who had become her true family, the friends who stood by her, the colleagues who pushed her forward, the ones who made her feel chosen. And then she said what I never imagined I would hear. She said that family isn't always about blood. It's about the people who choose you. Each sentence felt like a stone dropped into my chest. And then, for the first time all night, her eyes locked on mine. There was no warmth there, no recognition of the woman who had fought and bled for her future. Only contempt. I felt the room shift. The guests clapped politely, but their eyes darted toward me, as if they knew exactly who she was aiming at. My fingers tightened around my glass, though I had barely touched my drink. And then came the words that stripped me bare in front of everyone. She told me I didn't belong there. She told me I should leave. I rose slowly, my body trembling, my face hot with humiliation. 200 faces turned toward me. Some looked curious, some uncomfortable, some pitying. I tried to steady myself, smoothing my dress one last time. I told myself, just walk, just get to the door. Hold your head high. And then it happened, the moment that twisted the night in a way no one could have predicted. Before I could take a step, her husband stood. The scrape of his chair against the floor echoed louder than the clapping had moments before. He didn't look at her. He didn't sit back down when she tugged at his sleeve. He walked toward the microphone, his face set with a determination I had never seen before. The chatter in the room faded into silence. Even the servers froze where they stood. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to understand what he was about to do. Was he defending her? Was he defending me? Or was he about to unravel everything we thought this night was supposed to mean? What came next would not only change the course of that wedding, it would change the course of my life. When Ethan, the groom, reached for the microphone, the entire hall froze. My daughter's hand tried to pull him back, but he shook free. His jaw set with a determination that filled the air with electricity. I braced myself for more humiliation, certain he was about to defend her choice to cast me out. But what came next stunned not only me, but everyone sitting in that ballroom. Ethan began to speak, and instead of echoing her words, he revealed a truth I never expected him to acknowledge. He explained that when he and Emily first started dating, she painted me as bitter, controlling, impossible to please. He confessed that he had believed her, that he had carried that story in his heart for years, never questioning it. But then, just weeks before the wedding, he said he learned something different. He had spoken with my sister, Anna, who had shared the truth about my life. The nights I spent working 2 jobs, the sacrifices I made to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. He told the room that I had sold my wedding ring so Emily could stay in college, that I had carried debts to cover her medical bills, that I had given up nearly everything I had to make sure her future stayed intact. My knees weakened as I listened. I could hardly breathe. For years, I had begged silently for anyone to see what I had done, to acknowledge the cost. And now, here it was, spilling into a microphone in front of hundreds of witnesses. The room erupted in whispers. People turned to me with wide eyes, shock written on their faces. Some gasped, some shook their heads, and others stared at Emily with expressions that revealed their disappointment. My daughter sat frozen, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table as though she could hold the world from crumbling beneath her. Then came the moment that broke whatever fragile illusion was left. Ethan looked at me, then back at Emily, and slipped his wedding band from his finger. The gold caught the light as he placed it carefully on the head table in front of her. The sound of it hitting the wood echoed like thunder. He said he could not marry a woman who treated her own mother with such cruelty. His words rang clear, steady, final. Gasps filled the room. Someone dropped a glass, and for a moment, all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. I didn't remember how I made it out of that reception hall. The weight of eyes followed me as I walked, whispers chasing my steps like shadows. Outside, the night air struck my face, cool and sharp, and I finally let the tears fall. I sat down on a wooden bench under the lanterns that lit the garden path. My body shook, my breath uneven, but for the first time that evening, I could breathe without 100 stares pressing into me. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was Anna, my sister. Ethan had already called her to explain everything. She asked if I was all right, and I remember whispering that I didn't know what I felt. Part of me was devastated. Part of me was strangely relieved. And part of me, though I couldn't admit it out loud, felt seen for the first time in decades. That night marked the breaking point, though I didn't realize it yet. The unraveling of a relationship I had fought too hard to preserve, and the beginning of a new path I never expected to walk. Because what followed in the days after would force me to draw lines I had never dared to draw. And those boundaries would change everything. That night, after the reception, I barely slept. My body ached from holding myself together, my mind replaying every second of humiliation, every word Ethan had spoken. By morning, the weight of it all sat heavy on my chest. I thought maybe silence would protect me, but silence was never an option with Emily. My phone buzzed endlessly. At first, the messages were apologies, long streams of words about nerves, about not meaning what she said. I wanted to believe them, but I had lived this pattern before. When I didn't respond, the tone shifted accusations that I was judging her, that I didn't understand her struggles. By evening, her messages darkened further, words heavy with guilt and threats, the kind that twisted my heart and made me question my own strength. For years, I had excused this cycle. I told myself she was under pressure, that she would come around, that if I gave enough, she would finally give something back. But sitting with that phone in my hand, I realized it wasn't love. It was manipulation. And naming it for what it was felt like someone finally pulled back a curtain I had been afraid to touch. 3 days later, there was a knock at my sister Anna's front door. When I opened it, Emily stood there, but she was not the polished bride from the wedding. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled, her eyes red and swollen from sleepless nights. She crumbled the moment she saw me, begging me to fix things. She told me she had lost Ethan, that she was falling behind at work, that she couldn't manage her rent. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to rescue her. I took a deep breath and told her what I had never dared to say before. I told her that if she wanted a relationship with me, it would have to be different. I couldn't keep picking up the pieces. If she wanted me in her life, she would need to take responsibility, seek therapy, and face the damage she had caused. I would only meet her halfway. Her silence told me everything. She had never heard those words from me before. And for once, instead of feeling guilty, I felt steady. I had drawn a boundary, and it felt like the beginning of reclaiming myself. It was just days later when Ethan reached out. His voice was calm, softer than I expected. He told me he had been thinking about me, about women like me, women who gave everything and received so little in return. He said he had always dreamed of creating a place where women could heal, a place for those who had been overlooked or pushed aside. He had plans, funding, even permits, but he didn't have someone who understood the journey firsthand. He asked me if I would help him build it. I sat with his words for a long time. The thought of channeling my pain into something greater both terrified me and filled me with a spark I hadn't felt in years. For so long, my life had been defined by rejection, by waiting for scraps of affection from my daughter. And suddenly, there was a vision of purpose, something that belonged to me, something that mattered. That was the moment I said yes. And in saying yes, I chose not just to survive, but to rebuild. What started in those early conversations with Ethan would grow into something far larger than I ever imagined. And little by little, that project would help me rediscover the pieces of myself I thought were gone forever. Once I agreed to help Ethan, everything in my life began to shift. For the first time in decades, I wasn't living in the shadow of rejection. I was building something real, something that mattered. We started with an old building on the edge of town. It smelled of dust and peeling paint, but I could already see beyond the cracks in the walls. I walked through each room and imagined them filled with women laughing, learning, and rediscovering themselves. I told Ethan we needed a kitchen where women could learn catering skills, a craft room for sewing and quilting, and a quiet library corner for those who longed for peace. He sketched as I spoke, his pencil moving quickly, his energy almost contagious. My sister Anna joined us often, helping with paperwork and community outreach. Slowly, word began to spread. Volunteers came to paint the walls in warm colors. Local businesses donated supplies and furniture. A retired carpenter built bookshelves, while a group of college students hauled in donated tables and chairs. Every week, the empty building transformed into something alive with purpose. When the first women arrived, I was nervous. I worried that I wasn't enough, that my story was too broken to inspire anyone. But as they shared their own journeys, stories of abandonment, distance, betrayal, I realized that pain is a language we all understand. In their eyes, I saw my own reflection, and in their courage, I found a peace of mind. 6 months later, we stood outside that very building under the summer sun. Balloons swayed in the breeze, and a crowd of neighbors and city officials gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Ethan placed the scissors in my hand and told me this was my moment. My hands trembled, but not from fear. I felt awe, gratitude, and a strange new strength. As I cut the ribbon, the cheer that rose from the crowd filled my chest like music. Inside, the rooms were no longer empty. There were shelves stacked with donated books, bulletin boards covered in workshop schedules, and tables ready for support groups. When I stepped to the microphone that day, I thought back to Emily's wedding, to the silence that had followed her words, telling me I didn't belong. This silence felt different. It was filled with expectation, with hope. I lifted my chin and told the truth 6 months ago. I was told I didn't belong. But today, I stood in a place built on belonging, a place where every woman mattered. 2 years passed in what felt like a blink. Harbor House, as we named it, had grown beyond anything I imagined. We had opened 2 additional centers in nearby towns. More than 300 women had passed through our doors, each leaving their mark on my heart. A publisher even approached me, and my book, It's Never Too Late to Begin Again, found its way into the hands of women I might never meet, but who carried stories like mine. And then one afternoon, as I prepared for a conference talk on aging with dignity, Anna entered my office with a quiet smile. She told me someone was waiting in the lobby. When I stepped out, I froze. Emily was standing there. She looked different, softer, calmer. Her hair carried streaks of gray, her posture no longer proud but humble. For a moment, I couldn't move. After all these years, after all that pain, here she was. She told me she had been in therapy for 2 years. She admitted she had faced truths she had long avoided. And then, with a voice gentler than I remembered, she said she wanted to try again, not as mother and daughter burdened by history, but as 2 women starting over. I studied her face, searching for the arrogance that once defined her. Instead, I saw humility, even respect. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the ache of needing her love to feel whole. I had built a life full of purpose, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was. And yet, I also felt something I hadn't expected: openness. Maybe, just maybe, this was the moment to begin again. Sitting across from Emily that afternoon, I realized something profound. For most of my life, I had begged for her love. I had excused her distance, explained away her silence, and convinced myself that one day she would return to me with open arms. But as I listened to her speak with humility, admitting to the work she had done, I understood something I should have known all along. I no longer needed her love to feel whole. The years of struggle had taught me to stand on my own. Harbor House had given me purpose, a community of women who lifted each other, who reminded me daily that my worth was never dependent on whether my daughter chose to love me or not. For the first time in decades, I felt peace in knowing that I was enough exactly as I was. Still, I chose to open the door, not as a desperate mother begging for scraps of affection, but as a woman who had finally learned how to set her own terms. I told her we could start fresh, but only as equals. No more manipulation. No more cycles of guilt. If she truly wanted a relationship, it would have to be built on honesty, respect, and accountability. And when she nodded through tears, I saw that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for something new. That moment didn't erase the pain of the past. It didn't make me forget the nights I cried alone or the sacrifices I had buried deep in my chest. But it gave me clarity. Sometimes, being a good mother means letting go of the desperate need to be loved back. Sometimes, it begins with becoming a whole woman first. If there is one lesson I carry from this journey, it is this: never beg for love that should be freely given. We all deserve relationships built on respect, not control. And no matter how broken your story may feel, it is never too late to begin again. So if you've listened to my story and it touched a part of you, I hope you remember this. You are worthy of love, of peace, and of starting over on your own terms. And if my journey spoke to you, I would be grateful if you shared it, left a comment with your own reflections, and liked this video, because you never know who might need to hear that they, too, can begin again.